Hello, today we are going to be reviewing how to name binary molecular compounds. Binary, remember, refers to the fact that these compounds are made of just two elements, and the fact that they are molecular tells us that they are made entirely of nonmetals, and these nonmetals are held together by covalent bonds. If you think back to what we learned in Chemistry 1, covalent bonds are when electrons are shared amongst the atoms. So essentially, when you look at a compound and both of its elements are from the right side of the periodic table, that should indicate to you that you are working with a molecular compound. Our rules for naming the compounds are a little bit different than the ionic rules that we had reviewed. You are not going to be crisscrossing or simplifying at all when you are naming and writing formulas for molecular compounds. So a brief review. The first thing that you must keep in mind for naming molecular compounds is that you always name the more metallic element first. And that might seem kind of strange because I had just said that you're working with two nonmetals. So they're both nonmetals, but how do you decide which one is the more metallic out of the two? Essentially think of it as which one is closer to the metal side of the periodic table, which, remember, metals are on the left side of the periodic table. So if these two elements are in the same period, and remember period means row, then you are looking for the element that is farther to the left, and that's what you will name first. The element that's farther to the right will be the less metallic element and will come second in the compound. If the elements are not in the same row, but instead are in the same column, which we call being in the same group, then you will name the element that's further to the bottom first. We have to use prefixes in order to indicate how many of each atom you have. So let's review our prefixes. The prefix that you will use to indicate that there is one of something is mono. If there are two atoms, you will use the prefix di. If there are three, we use tri. If there are four, we will use the prefix tetra. If there are five, we use the prefix penta. If there are six, you shall use the prefix hexa. If there are seven, we use hepta. If there are eight, octa is the prefix, 9 is nona, and 10 is deca. The only real exception to this is that you should never ever use the word mono on the first word of the compound. You will only use mono on the second word. And as I said just a little bit ago, you should never ever crisscross these or simplify the molecular compounds. They are what they are, and you leave them as is. Don't overthink or overcomplicate these. I would like to throw out there, though, that you still should use the convention of changing the ending to IDE on the second word. So some sample problems. If I give you the name, you have to provide me with the formula. So the name carbon dioxide, since there is no prefix on carbon, we assume that there must just be one because you're never supposed to use mono as the prefix on the first word. So one carbon. Dioxide, that tells me that there are two oxygens, so I will put O for oxygen and a subscript of 2. Dihydrogen monoxide. Di tells me that there are two hydrogens, so I'm going to put H2. Monoxide means one oxygen, so I put O, and I don't have to write a 1, it's an implied one. Look there, that ends up being H2O, which is water. So remember that the technical name for water is in fact dihydrogen monoxide. Sometimes you'll have compounds like water that have a common name, and then also the scientific name. Tricarbon tetranitride. So tri means 3, so I'm going to put a C3 for tricarbon. Tetranitride tells me that I have 4 nitrogens, so this will be C3N4. On the flip side, if I am given the formula, I have to come up with the name. So here I have N2. So the prefix for 2 is di. N is nitrogen. Remember, you don't change the ending on the first word. So dinitrogen is going to be my first word. Then I have 4 oxygen. So I'm going to call that tetraoxide. P2O5. I'm still going to use the di prefix, but this time I have phosphorus, so diphosphorus. And then I have 5 oxygens, so the prefix for 5 is pentaoxide. So P2O5 would be correctly named as diphosphorus pentaoxide. XeF6, that would be called xenon. I'm not going to put a prefix on it since there's one of them. I just leave the mono off. Xenon hexafluoride, because there are 6 fluorines. Let's do one other example while we're here. What about if I had capital C, capital S? I would call that carbon, and I don't use a mono on the first word, so it's just carbon. But then there is 1 sulfur, so I do need to use mono on my second word and call this monosulfide. So CS is called carbon monosulfide, and I wanted to throw that out there because people get so used to not using mono on the first word that they sometimes forget you do still need to use it for the second word. I hope that this brief tutorial has helped refresh your memory about molecular compounds. Remember, molecular compounds are formed between 2 nonmetals, so we're talking about elements on the right side of the periodic table that are covalently bonded. You have to use prefixes so you know how many of each atom you have. Never crisscross and never simplify.